Chair, I think we've lost you.
The confirmation of minutes from last meeting. Can I have somebody move that, please?
I'll happily move that, Chair. I think your connection's a bit funny. We didn't get the last sort of 30 seconds of what you said.
Okay, well, that's a problem. Yeah, I'm on cellular, so that should be okay. Can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
All right, okay. Welcome, Councillor Coates. So thank you for moving that. Alderman Barakis, is there any dissent to accepting the minutes? No dissent. I declare that carried. Item 3 is consideration of supplementary items, and we do have a couple of supplementary items. Can I have somebody move that? Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Any dissent to that? No dissent. Declare that carried. Item 4, are there any indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest? Alderman Barakis, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Declare an interest in item 12 on the sub. The 42.
Okay. We'll take that as noted. Thank you. Item 5 is transfer of agenda items. Are there any transfers? Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to transfer supplementary item number 13 to the closed. The outcome can come back to the open, but the nature of discussing a whole heap of people's CVs and whatever, I think is probably the nature it should be discussed in the closed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other transfer of agenda items? No, so I'll see if there's any dissent to that. Is there any dissent? No dissent. Declare that carried. Item 6, planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. Can I have somebody move that, please? Alderman Barakis, thank you. Any dissent? No dissent. Declare that carried. Item 7, we're a committee acting as a planning authority. So we'll go to the first item with deputations, which is item 7. Where is it now? Don't have it in front of me. Oh, sorry, 7.2.1, which is 19 View Street. Craig, could you let people in for View Street, please? All right, I'm just trying to find my deputations page. Doing these things at home doesn't always work so well. Okay, so have we got everybody in? Not as yet, by the looks of things.
Can I speak? Ian Johnson is having trouble connected to the Zoom connection.
Okay, so where are you? Oh, there you. Andrew, so you're, yes, okay, so you're just waiting to get the connection with Ian Johnson.
Daniel Gray should be.
Yep, Daniel Gray's here, that's fine. Okay, so now, committee, just to let you know that Lucy Burke-Smith, who's speaking on behalf of the applicant in relation to heritage, has another commitment at 5:30. So I think what I'll do is leave it. If you have any specific questions, or if you want to ask any specific questions, do you want to do that now, or would you prefer to do that after we've heard the 3 other deputations, bearing in mind we have that limited time? What would you like to do?
Well, Chair, normally we have the deputations and then the proponent answers any questions. So I don't know if we could change it around, but it's your call.
Okay, so bearing that in mind, what we'll do is try and get through things in a fairly swift manner. So I'll first go to Ms. Danielle Gray. Actually, yeah, Ms. Danielle Gray, you're on speaking on behalf of Andrew Bowie and Bernadette Premser from 21 View Street. Can I hand over to you, please? And you have 5 minutes. Thanks. Just take your microphone off mute, please.
Is that better? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. My name's Danielle Gray. I'm a planning consultant engaged by the residents who directly adjoin the subject site where the proposed development will be occurring. My background is I work with a lot of local heritage developments. Approximately 50 to up to 90% of my workload at any one time are dealings and providing advocacy for developments in heritage areas. This site, as the councillors, aldermen are aware, it's in a heritage area. It was previously in a heritage area under the old 1982 planning scheme. In terms of the concerns that my clients have, these relate substantially to the scale and the extent of the proposed development and its lack of, I guess you could call, appropriateness for the surrounding heritage precinct. So their concerns relate to the discretions that are invoked by the proposed development under the Heritage Code. In particular, as outlined in a substantial amount of detail in my representations to council on my client's behalf, I have expressed concern about the failure of the proposed development to comply with E1382 performance criteria P1 to P3. Of those performance criteria, consideration has to be given and demonstrated by a development against statements of significance. Now, this area, it's clearly stated that it is one of the best collection of Art Deco era dwellings in City of Hobart. There's a high degree of integrity and intactness. There's a strong contribution of the majority of dwellings to the streetscape, and they have high heritage values, although many are not individually listed. In designing a proposal, it's my expectation that you would be looking at the form, the scale, roof forms, roof pitches, materials, colours and finishes, how the proposal was viewed from all public vantage points, as some of the things that I would typically talk a client through in terms of designing something for a heritage precinct. Now, it's my view that none of that has been done when the proposal was lodged to council. We acknowledge there's been a small number of amendments made to the proposal, primarily the retention of a rear chimney and also lowering the height of the development. The development, however, is substantially the same. Now, in terms of what is appropriate in a heritage area, you would typically look at form and scale. Now, if you have a look at the elevations as to what has been submitted by the developer, this is a two-storey block of residential development that, quite frankly, in my view, it absolutely dwarfs the 1923 cottage to which it has a small physical connection. In viewing the proposal plans, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's actually a unit development in the backyard. The proposed development takes up the majority of the backyard, and yet one of the characteristics of this area, although not implicitly stated in the planning scheme, are garden settings and the intactness of development. Now, in walking around the area is a very intact development. Contemporary development is, it's not obvious. And where it has been done, it's typically of the form that has occurred at my client's property, i.e. a second story extension that extends the existing roof space and replicates building form, materials and scale. This is not what has occurred at this development. In terms of the appropriateness of it, I mean, I'd probably like to compare it to a development that ultimately failed in the tribunal, and that was refused on 7 grounds, on heritage grounds, by council. And that was a development, I think it was 53 Arthur's Circus, And the name of the appeal was Solbans versus Hobart City Council. Now, one of the issues with that development was the two-storey nature of the development and its non-compliance with exhibiting characteristics of the heritage precinct. Now, that was refused again, 7 grounds under the Heritage Code, the same Heritage Code we've got here. It was then appealed, went to the tribunal, and that refusal was upheld. It beggars belief that this development could be appropriate. It's repeatedly referred to as being unfortunate in the Heritage Officer's assessment. That to me raises red flags. I cannot understand how council would refuse this proposal, the Arthur Circus proposal, and yet endorse this under the same Heritage Code. It's my view it should be refused under E1382 P1 to P3. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle, and good timing. Committee, do you have any questions? If there are no questions, we can go on to Andrew Bowie. Or you do, Councillor Data? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Would you agree, thank you for your presentation, would you agree that on this particular application, the officers who are also qualified have approved this development application? And so therefore, two different views on it.
Thank you for the question. In heritage, there are frequently different views. However, in reading the heritage assessment that has been provided by the council officer, I found it very surprising that the language used in that assessment, it was very hesitant in endorsing the proposal. Again, I mean, this is something that was repeatedly referred to as being unfortunate in terms of the proposal. That for me it wasn't a damning refusal, a damning endorsement of the proposed development. Quite the contrary. It's not a glowing assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now to you, Mr. Bowie, if you'd like to make some other points in relation to your representation.
Sure, I do have some images to show. Yes, the council officer ready to show them on my prompts. Thank you. Okay, so councillors and aldermen, I made this deputation on behalf of myself and my family, though concerns and objections to the proposed development to be raised by many of our neighbours. We have lived at 21 View Street, immediately west of the proposed development, since 2014. We chose to move into the area because of the good amenity and fine heritage of the Golf Links Estate Precinct. We are not against development, but development needs to be well thought out, especially in heritage precincts, and it is clear that the development as currently proposed does not fit in a heritage precinct. It in no way complements the existing 1920s Californian bungalow at the front of the lot, is in no way subservient to the original building, and is not sympathetic both in scale and styles to the heritage overlay. If approved, the new building would be roughly twice the size of what would remain of the existing bungalow at 19 View Street, completely inconsistent with the policies of the heritage overlay. Image 1A on the screen there is the current site corridor from our back garden facing east. Contrast this with image 1B at the bottom of the figure, which is the artist's impression of the proposed development from our back garden. This clearly shows the bulk and contemporary design of the new development in a way appearing as an apartment block separate from the existing bungalow and completely out of keeping with the heritage overlay of the neighbourhood. The development would have large windows directly looking down into our primary indoor living spaces and into most of our garden, and particularly onto our only deck and our courtyard where our children play. I object strongly to this major loss of amenity to our family home, principally loss of solar access, which will be especially bad in winter, and loss of privacy, which we are deeply concerned about. There are three main reasons why this development application should not be supported. Firstly, demolition of original buildings. The proposal includes demolition of original lean-to and an original outbuilding. Importantly, both buildings can be seen from the public realm in View Street through site corridors between neighbouring properties. For some reason, the Heritage Officer's report commented that the outbuilding was not visible from the street. It clearly is. This demolition will therefore result in the loss of built form that contributes to the historical and cultural significance of the precinct, thus inconsistent with section E13.8.1 of the planning scheme. Image 2, please. Thank you. Secondly, the proposed development will be clearly visible from the public realm in Grosvenor Street, as well as being visible along driveways and other public vantage points in View Street. It will appear as a bulky form made mostly of glass and black metal sheeting. The impacts on this public site corridor in Grosvenor Street are massive, as shown in image 2. In fact, the site corridor up the back gardens of the View Street will no longer remain. Thank you. Again, for some reason, the Heritage Officer's report commented that there will only be some visibility from Grosvenor Street, but as you can clearly see, the new building will be extremely visible. It therefore fails to comply with standards for buildings and works in a heritage precinct under section E13.8.2 of the planning scheme. Thirdly, approval of a development of this scale and contemporary form in a heritage precinct will most likely lead to other similar proposals, opening the floodgates for commercial developers to acquire properties with undeveloped back gardens in the heritage precincts of our city, with a view to building multi-storey contemporary buildings inconsistent with the Heritage Code. The Friends of the Golf Links Estate community group is extremely concerned about this, as evidenced by the large number of representations received at council to this set of plans. Image 3, please. Image 3A shows our part of the Golf Links Estate heritage precinct as it is today. The large garden settings behind the original Californian bungalows are evident, consistent with the heritage overlay. Where there have been extensions into the back gardens, they have been single story, and where double story additions have been built, they have been built within the roof forms of the existing buildings. Next image, please. Image 3B shows how the proposed development would appear if built, filling most of the back garden at 19 View Street and being visible from the public streetscapes far and wide. Next image, please. Image 3C shows the significant negative impact on solar access at 21 View Street in Windsor from the proposed development. Next image, please. And finally, image 3D shows what this part of the Golf Links estate would look like if every back garden was developed in a similar way. Commercial developers will see this as an opportunity, and approval of this proposal will set a precedent. Surely the planning scheme is designed to protect against this sort of development under the Historical Heritage Code. So in summary, this development proposal is for an extremely large and bulky, self-contained, contemporary two-storey building, essentially a second house filling the back garden of the lot, only loosely connected to the original building by a narrow passage. The new building cannot really be considered an extension of the original bungalow, to which it has a clear disconnection both physically and in character. The development would dominate and overshadow our home, our garden, significant loss of sunlight, loss of privacy, loss of amenity, and loss of heritage value of the neighbourhood. The new development would have a massive detrimental visual impact from public streetscapes due to the scale and contemporary form, and it is extremely problematic under multiple standards and performance criteria under the Historical Heritage Code. We feel the developers have missed and or overlooked opportunities to reduce the impact on both neighbourhood amenity and neighbourhood heritage in their design plans. And we hope the council will share some of these concerns in making their decision. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Mr. Bowie. Now, are there any questions? Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I heard you, and I stand to be corrected. Image 1B, you stated that it's an impression. If it is an impression, then there is a difference between what is an impression and reality, isn't it? In reality, it may not be that.
Well, so there is no, in the development application, there is no visual images of what the new development may look like from our back garden. This image was done by a qualified architect, now retired. It is an artist impression based on the design plans, done with the best of intention to depict what it will look like from the back garden in our building. Similarly, image 2 is also an artist impression looking from the public streetscape on Grosvenor. Again, it's done with the best intention in mind by a qualified architect using the design plans. The development application did not show any images of what the building would look like from Grosvenor Street, probably because it's quite clearly visible from the public streetscape.
Thank you.
Sorry, I seem to be losing connections quite a bit. I don't know if everybody's having difficulty with the sound or not. But Craig, is there anything to be done? Craig?
What was that? Sorry, I missed it.
All right. Sorry, I'm having difficulties. My connection isn't working very well, so we're having difficulties with this. I'll try and sign in with my phone, I think. Perhaps Alderman Barakis, you might be able to chair for the moment whilst I just sort this out. Thank you.
I'm able to take the reins. Does that need a motion or anything? Just if we're doing it just during this, or I can just take the reins for the next couple of minutes.
I've got a question, Acting Chair.
Alderman Briscoe, you got the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Just as I think your explanation was very good, your arguments there. You wouldn't be, or your neighbours presumably wouldn't be objecting to any development happening there, would you?
No, not at all. And in fact, there's been some, excellent developments in the immediate neighbourhood and in the wider, precinct that have really added to the value of the heritage in the Golf Links estate. I mean, I think my image is sort of 3A shows. If you're looking at the developments that have been done so far, as I say, they've either been single story that are in the back gardens, or in their double story, they've been built within the existing roof forms, with it being sympathetic to the heritage and have not completely dominated the back gardens or been a two-story building. So something of those, development of that style would be most welcome, and I think would add to the value of the heritage, the Golf Links estate.
Good, thank you very much.
Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Chair. Look through you, Chair, Acting Chair. A few questions. I guess one I always gets asked, but I like to do it. What contact has the proponent made in terms of trying to come to if you like, a solution that works for all parties?
To date, there's been no contact in terms of discussion of the development plans or the application, either prior to submission or since.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then the second one, obviously in your presentation, and thank you very much for that. I know it obviously it takes resourcing to put together images and get those data together. But is it your view then that you believe the council officers have erred because they didn't have the correct information? I note that you said, look, there wasn't any images taken from your property. There wasn't anything in regards to the shading, and obviously the view going in from was it Grosvenor Street down the bottom. Is it your view that the council, in putting together a report, it's not so much that they've erred in their report, but rather they haven't had the full information?
Yeah, so I guess there's several parts to that question. In the council report, there's a couple of images which are taken from Grosvenor Street looking back up towards where the development would be, but they're sort of taken at an oblique angle, looking sort of back towards the corner of Grosvenor and View Street, not really looking up that view corridor, which I show in figure 2. So perhaps they didn't quite, capture that view corridor and capture what the real visibility of the new building would be. Obviously, there's no need for the heritage officers to take any photos from our back garden. It's not a public streetscape or anything like that. But I think in the report, there was a couple of instances where they said that the outbuilding wasn't visible from the street, therefore it could be demolished. Well, it is clearly visible from the street through these site corridors between neighbouring properties. And I think there was another reference to something which wasn't quite as it is in reality if you had a site visit to the area. And I think these are important because whilst they're small examples alone, when you have multiple instances where the heritage officer report doesn't quite capture what the reality of the site is, then they all add up to several performance criteria, which has to be really judged whether such a building could be approved or not.
Thank you. And then just one final question. I mean, obviously, touching on what Alderman Briscoe said in regards to development and all, but in your view, would there be things that they could do to the current proposal as it's put forward, tweaks and changes that would go to some way to allay the concerns of the local residents, or it really does need a major refit? So I guess I'll speak personally for our family. I mean,
our major concerns are loss of privacy, and the windows facing west are very large, appear to be transparent glass. That concerns us a lot. In any sort of development, it would be some discussion to have some options which weren't so intrusive in terms of our loss of privacy. That's our own feelings towards the development, but I personally feel that the development is a bit out of scale and scope and doesn't really fit in the heritage layer. There was a large number of developments. I think it said 18 in the council report. So there's 18 concerned people who've put in representations. There's probably many more in the Golf Links Estate Community Group. So I can't really speak for them all by saying, well, if we can make these changes here, and that would appease everyone. And some changes that might be good for some parties will likely not satisfy others. So I guess the wider community would have to be discussed or broached regarding that.
Now I'm back on deck. Alderman Barakis, you have your hand up.
You thank you, and you seem to be a bit clearer now, so hopefully that's fixed.
Good.
I've got a couple of questions for you, Mr. Bai. I suppose the first one, just in regards to we talk about the size and bulk and whatnot of the application. Just noting that it does, going off the report, seem to be well within the building envelope. I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
I'm not a town planner, but I've looked at the plans and understood them, and it does appear to be within the building envelope. It seems to push the building envelope to the maximum in almost every direction, so as to accommodate to be approved under the planning laws. It is within the envelope, but only just. I think there's some discretions requested regarding private open space that are not quite met in the development application. But yeah, it appears it does fit within the building envelope, but obviously that doesn't apply to the heritage concerns.
And just the other one, just jumping off your response to Councillor Dutta's question in regards to the artist depiction that we had there with the big black sort of block. Just noting, I think one of the conditions was that the palette of exterior colours and materials must reflect the palettes within the local streetscape and precinct. So I think it's just to comment on that, because the artist depiction did show a big black mass, and I imagine if this is meeting the conditions of the of what's being suggested by the officers, then it would have to be in a type of cladding that would be somewhat more in line with the area.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked, I haven't fully understood some of the conditions of the permits. I think that some of them were regarding the balustrade being sort of a solid nature rather than glass. I think that it's still going to be a very large glass and black metal contemporary building, even if the balustrade is changed to be more amenable. And the elevation facing west is certainly of this black cladding, not really sympathetic to the environment or the heritage of the Golf Links Estate.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I think Mr. Johnson is with you, is he?
He is, and I think I've got permission to go and get him. So
good. Okay, yeah, if you could go and get him. And I'm sorry, Ms. Burke-Smith, I think that we're just going to run out of time to hear you if you have to leave at 5:30, unless there's any pressing questions from the committee. Speak now. Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right. So, hi, Mr. Johnson.
Hello.
You're all set up in somebody else's bedroom, thanks.
Yes.
You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I speak tonight as a private citizen, but I'm a retired architect, having worked in the profession for 45 years. I've lived in Grosvenor Street for 30 years. About 25 years ago, a growing awareness of the importance of the area's heritage qualities led my involvement to the formation of a committee of neighbours to work with council officers, local schools and the university to try and resolve various issues. This work was one of the foundations for the later formation of the Golf Links Precinct Council. But now I find myself in the position of opposing this development, not only for our interests, but also for the interest of my community. Council staff told me that there were 25 individual objections from 18 households. So many agree with my position, and many more than that in the neighbourhood also agree. Image number 1, please. This is the view of the project from the street outside my house in Grosvenor Street. Now, others have spoken on heritage issues, and I would like to say that in my interpretation of the planning report, there are clauses in the scheme where the aim to protect the neighbourhood from developments like this, and I question whether the planner's report's interpretation is correct due to these factors. The exceptionally large mass of the 2-storey extension, which takes over most of the backyard, the large areas of glass, its near flat roof, its out of context building materials, its out of context building detail, and add to that the unreasonable loss of sunlight and loss of privacy for many neighbours, its effect on the subdivision pattern, the demolition of heritage structures, the issue of visibility for more than half the extension from Grosvenor Street. Image 2, please. This is a representation of a sun diagram in winter. We live on the western boundary of 19 View Street, and our house is the house below the development on the slide. The planning scheme states that the siting and scale of dwelling should not cause unreasonable loss of amenity by reduction of sunlight to habitable rooms. We currently receive sun in our kitchen only in the afternoon. We believe this development will result in a total loss of any winter sunlight to our kitchen. This is a totally unreasonable loss. Image number 3, please. Now, this is a view of the proposal from my backyard. In regard to overshadowing, the planning scheme says the building shouldn't unreasonably overshadow private open space of an adjoining lot. This extension is oriented to face onto our backyard. Now, our backyard is only 9 metres wide. We'll be looked over by a 16-metre long deck, behind which is 11 metres of floor-to-ceiling glass sliding doors. We will be overlooked from a height and at near proximity. We will be observed from all angles, and there will be no spot in our private open space where we can be private. We think this is a very unreasonable lack of amenity, and our property is not the only one affected this way. The planning scheme states that a building should not cause loss of amenity by its apparent scale, bulk, or proportions. We think that an extension to a house should be of a lesser scale than the existing house. But this house is about twice the area of what remains of the existing house. Our amenity is greatly and adversely affected by the disproportionate scale. Image 4, please. This is the view of the proposal from our neighbours Susan and Jeff Frame at 38 York Street. Likewise, our neighbours on the applicant's northern boundary will also suffer a complete lack of privacy to their backyard and kitchen and dining areas, as they will be overlooked by a living area and deck. In conclusion, I think that the proposal should be refused and that the applicant be asked to redesign the extension that is in context with and respectful to the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Everybody's timed their presentation really well. So thank you very much for that. Committee, do you have any questions, please? Are there no? Oh, so Councillor Coates, you have a question?
Look, just very briefly, and I think this will be something I'll be raising in a second anyway with council officers, but just headed over to pass here. But the diagram showing the sun impact,
Yes.
is that just a? I guess what I want to understand is how did that get calculated?
Yeah, sure. I worked it out really carefully. Yeah, I got out my sun.
And keep in mind, I know you said you're a retired architect, so I'm not trying to cast aspersions.
No, but I didn't just guess it. No,
Yep.
I used the Commonwealth booklet on sunshine and shade in Australia, and I calculated it.
Yep. And was that as of what do you call it, 3 p.m. on the winter solstice sort of day?
It was, yeah.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Bowie, what do you think the intent of the design next door is? Is it to take full advantage of the view across your back?
I'm Ian. I'm Ian,
Oh,
not
sorry, Ian.
not
Yeah.
Andrew.
Sorry,
Sorry,
saw the name there.
Start.
Sorry, Ian. So what do you think the intent of the proposal is? Is it to take full advantage of the views across your backyard?
Yes, I suppose it is. There's an opportunity for the applicant to lower the development on the ground floor by approximately 300 or so, 300, because the ground floor ceiling line is noted on the drawings about 2 points, or it scales off the drawing about 2.7 metres, and the minimum and usual height for bedrooms, habitable rooms, bedrooms, is 2.4 metres. So my guess is that's correct, that they're trying to take advantage of the view across our backyard.
And if it was lowered by what you've just suggested, would that make it easier to accept?
Yes, it would, but we'd have to talk it. We'd have to discuss this with our neighbours, because while we are we would have, our neighbours would also have views, and it wouldn't be fair on them. But basically, it would improve things slightly, but it still would be. I still feel it would be a sellout to the community.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so it doesn't look like there are any further questions. Thanks, Mr. Johnson. And we now move to Mr. Fraser Reid, who's speaking on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Reid, you'll note that there has been quite a number of concerns raised, and I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, to address some of those things, please.
Hello, committee. Had a few technical issues.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Look, I've been trying to hear the representatives' discussion, and I generally hear the considerations of amenity and the heritage considerations. Firstly, in relation to amenity, as you'll note from the officer report, the proposal is within the building envelope. It's actually comfortably within the building envelope. Could be considerably higher to be within it. And those sorts of considerations about overshadowing, privacy, all of those matters fall away as soon as you comply with those matters. Sorry, I'm a bit short of breath running across the road. So those matters fall away. So there is a discretion in relation to private open space, but it is it's to do with the amount of open space that's directly accessible from the living area. And as the officers have noted, it comfortably meets the performance criteria around that. The other discretions relate to like site distance for the driveway and to stormwater management, and they're all satisfied in terms of the performance criteria. So it is really just the heritage precinct consideration. It's not a listed place in its own right, but it's within a heritage precinct, the key issue there is the subdivision pattern of the Golf Links estate. As is noted in the report, this proposal doesn't vary. It's not one for subdivision. It doesn't change the subdivision pattern, and it remains as a house in the garden. And I suppose really I'd just refer you to the officer report, which is obviously supportive and identifies that the issues that are of concern by the neighbours really are not supported by the planning scheme. So other than that, I think I'd probably just make myself available to answer any questions the committee has. I think it's probably the most useful way to spend the time.
Thanks, Mr. Reid. And we have Councillor Harvey, then Alderman Briscoe to ask questions.
Sorry, Chair, I left my hand up from the previous one.
Alderman Briscoe, then Councillor Coates, then Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. I know we've heard some alternate heritage.
About 2.7 metres.
I think someone's talking over me, but I'll continue. Mr. Fraser, has your client considered a lower, maybe a one-storey extension, which would probably take away all the concerns of the neighbours, I imagine?
Look, I think they've set about to address what the planning scheme needs it to address, and they've modelled the proposal to sit within the building envelope and the relevant considerations under the scheme. I don't know whether they've considered a single-storey extension, but I suppose my role is to advise them on the planning scheme considerations, and I think in this case it does sit comfortably under the planning scheme. And that's obviously the conclusion the officers have come to as well.
Thank you.
Alderman Barakis, then Councillor.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Look, I suppose, like once again noting how it was said that this is within the building envelope. Sorry, I just had a mind blank. Are you able to just explain that how it's a bit unfortunate that your heritage person's left, but how you guys have worked with the council to come to this design?
Yes, yeah, I'm not sure. I missed the beginning of the meeting with my technical problems, but the Lucy Burke-Smith was available, but she's doing a city talk tonight, starting at 5:30. That's why she had to run off. But in terms of how we progressed this, there was a pre-lodgement discussion with the officers, suggesting some modifications to original proposal, and that progressed. And then following the first round of representations, there was some further changes to reduce the height of the extension to no higher than the ridge height of the existing house. And there were some other minor modifications that I can't recall, but yeah, it was keeping it below the ridge height of the building, so it wasn't a prominent structure from the street. Yeah.
Councillor Coates, then Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, just one question while I touch on it. And obviously, you and your client will be aware that this will be going to council. So tonight's, if you like, not the final thing. And I appreciate you may not be able to speak on behalf of your client, but obviously some of the concerns raised today, and we've heard that from your point of view, they're not necessarily concerns in regards to the building code, but more from your perspective. But do you think your client would be amenable to making some changes in regards to the concerns that he's heard tonight? So I'm thinking along the lines of possibly looking at reduction of window size or frosting on the western facing windows, possibly looking at maybe advice around the landscaping and around the privacy concerns that have been raised.
Look, they might be open to some minor changes like that, but I think from council's perspective, the key consideration is that those privacy considerations are not opened up under the scheme. So I think it's difficult to actually impose those things on the proposal, given the compliance with the privacy considerations and the building envelope in relation to other, visual bulk considerations and things like that. Or, if someone's concerned about impacts on views, obviously that's not supported by the planning scheme. So, yeah, I think it's difficult to recommend those sorts of changes to the proposal.
Thank you.
Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up from the question that was asked by Councillor Coates, it appears then that the position for the applicant is very strong because the officers have approved it, and therefore any minor changes or talking to the neighbours would be of no value, as it were. Would that be true conclusion to arrive at?
Oh, look, I wouldn't say it's strong because the planning scheme supports the proposal, I think, is the key issue. So the fact that the officers have come to the same conclusion as myself and Ms. Burke-Smith, I suppose, gives strength to the proposal, yes. The concerns raised by the representatives are not supported by the scheme. And the artist's impressions that you've seen, they're not accurate. As council will be aware, there's a lot of technical process involved in coming up with accurate montages. So I'd just be cautious about treating any of those with any significance.
Thank you.
And Mr. Reid, I just have a couple of questions. So whether they're accurate or not, do you think that is a reasonable impact, particularly on the Grosvenor Street neighbour in relation to overlooking? Because you have that open space right along that deck and glass windows looking out onto it.
Well, again, in terms of what's reasonable, we have the planning scheme that is the guidance that we use to determine what a reasonable privacy impacts. And once you're 3 metres away from the boundary, you comply with those sorts of considerations. So it is reasonable, and it's, as you'd be aware, the scheme has acceptable solutions which are deemed to comply, deemed to satisfy the objective of that standard is to, have reasonable regard to privacy of neighbours. So yes, council can be confident that that is satisfied by the document that council must use to make its decisions on. So it is satisfied. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Fraser has thrown doubt on the diagrams produced by at least a retired architect, and I presume other professionals involved as well. Would your client, Mr. Fraser, provide, in fact, I don't understand why they weren't provided, but provide what you would say are accurate diagrams? Or accurate?
It's Fraser Reid. I think you know that you just slipped up.
What did I say? Sorry, Mr. Reid. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's an easy mistake to make. So the key issue here, and Mr. Noy would explain that as well, is that once you comply and that you're in the building envelope, there's no need to assess those visual impact considerations. So you don't need to provide that additional information to demonstrate that visual bulk is acceptable in terms of its relationship with the neighbours. So that's why they weren't provided, because the planning scheme doesn't require that to be provided.
Yes, there's a bit of a circular argument going there, Fraser. So because they're deemed to provide the impact on the neighbour is not shown in so-called accurate photo montages, and it's up to the neighbours to provide those accurate photo montages. So I think I'll be asking some questions of our officers in a moment. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, if I just follow that up, because I might have been confusing. Once you're within the building envelope, you don't need to consider the visual impact of the proposal on the neighbours. So it's deemed to comply.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Reid, and we'll now open the item for discussion. So who have we got to speak first? Alderman Briscoe, and then Alderman Briscoe. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Now I know I've asked Mr. Noy, or someone's asked Noy to provide conditions for a refusal or reasons for refusal. I'd like to move the motion for refusal. I think it revolves around heritage considerations. I was there when I've been on the council, as a couple others have been, when we were developing the standards for this golf links subdivision. And I know we've had minor arguments where minor things to do with heritage have been refused by the officers and we've overturned them. But this is a major impact on the heritage of this golf links estate. And I would agree with the neighbours that it has an impact. Now, whilst we might get into technical arguments like Mr. Reid has, that you don't need to know the impact on the neighbours. I think you do. That's why we have a committee here, to listen to the neighbours' concerns. And I think the representatives have convinced me, and I've visited the site and I've visited a number of the houses around the site. I'm convinced that we should refuse this on heritage grounds. And because we will be, if we don't protect this golf links estate now on heritage grounds, then I agree with the neighbours that every new resident of that will look at a block of land or their garden and say, oh, we could put another double-storey extension in our garden, and suddenly we haven't got the golf links estate at all. So perhaps, Mr. Noy, is it possible for you to put up the conditions of refusal, or the reasons for refusal?
Through you, Chair. Craig, have you got those?
Thank you for that.
So it's just those three reasons on heritage, is it?
Yes, yeah, I believe so. I think they're the strongest. Well, that to me, many of the arguments flow from those anyway. So I suggest that these are the strong arguments.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I was going to move the same motion on those very three grounds. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I was going to move the officer's recommendation, and I might foreshadow that. But the look, I think, you know, whether or not, and I'll refer to the Heritage Officer's report when they say, look, it you know, the proposed extension has been designed to achieve the absolute limits of the scheme with poor regard to the non-statutory heritage values. I think the implication is, and I can ask this just for posterity of the director, that if the implication is there that the officers do believe that it's satisfied it is within the absolute maximum limits of the scheme, and it does satisfy the statutory heritage value. So can I ask that?
Look, clearly it's well within the building envelope, and I think that comment has been made by Mr. Reid. A much higher building and much more intrusive building could be considered under that building envelope and would have much greater impact in terms of overlooking and overshadowing, but still comply with the acceptable solutions. I think in relation to the heritage aspects, impact on the heritage provisions, and I'd remind elected members that the actual building itself is not listed. It's the heritage precinct, and we understand, I think that all elected members understand that. So it's, and the applicant in earlier iterations of the design had a proposal that projected above the ridge line of the original California bungalow cottage, and it was as a result of concerns by the officers that it would be visible, unlike adjacent. It would be visible, a bit like the adjacent second-story pop top that was recently constructed. It is quite visible. So the heritage officers were concerned about that based on the heritage code, and had dialogue with the applicant, and the applicant proceeded to amend the proposal to accord with the concerns about its visibility from the streetscape, from the street, and the impact on streetscape, which is a fundamental concern with any new development within the heritage precinct. So all in all, the proposal is clearly viewed as something that the officers can support, both in terms of residential amenity impacts on adjacent neighbours, and also in relation to the impacts on the historical significance of the precinct.
Thank you for that. And just supposed to follow up and just to confirm, this design, this application is the version post consultation with the heritage staff and the planning officers of council.
That's correct.
Look, thank you for that. And look, I think we need to be careful as a council. I think, noting the potential impact of amenity on the neighbours, that when we have applicants that design something that is within the planning scheme, and these are the rules that we set out, and the reason we set out these rules are so that somebody wants to build something, they can look at the rules, and if they do things within the rules, and then they're on the right track. And we need to be careful as a council when we have applicants that do things within the rules. They consult with the council, they take on the advice of council, they put forward something that's very clearly within the planning scheme. For us to be rejecting that, I think, especially without good reason, is I think sends a pretty murky message to people wanting to either do a house extension or wanting to develop in the city. And we've done it before in the past, but I think it's something that we need to be very, very careful with. This is something that, as the director has said, is pretty clearly within the planning scheme, including on heritage. And I will note that our heritage officers in the past I've disagreed with, and they, in my view, I think they do tend on the side of caution when it comes to recommendations for planning applications. And that's fine. But I think with all of that context, I think this is something that really clearly should be being approved. I think if it does end up in the appeals tribunal, it'll be a pretty a predictable case as to what's going to happen. So look, I'll be foreshadowing approval. I'd be urging everybody to support that, because I think anything else I think would be a bit disappointing, and a disappointing message for us to be sending as a planning authority.
Thank you, Alderman Barakis. I think we're all entitled to our own positions on this, but thank you for that. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I think we have a problem in the precinct with the planning scheme that allows unacceptable, in my mind, developments to potentially occur. There's another development up the hill in View Street that I visited the other day to get a perspective on what happens when there's overdevelopment of backyards. And the neighbour down the hill from this backyard development now has lost a lot of use of their backyard because it's overlooked by a couple of balconies right into their private open space in the backyard. So that one was maybe one of the first in that section of Sandy Bay to suffer, you know, what we're talking about here tonight. And I think the neighbours deserve better in this precinct. I think they deserve a lot better than what is being proposed here tonight, even though it might comply with the planning scheme. I think there's deficiencies in the planning scheme that need to be looked at in order to protect the amenity of the neighbourhood. Now, as the representative suggested, there's the possibility that this will continue to occur with developments that do fit the planning scheme, and we will see more and more conflict between neighbours as what I think is an inappropriate development, and more of those developments occur impacting on their neighbours. I'm very confident and I'm very comfortable supporting the recommendation for refusal tonight. And I do think at some point we need to reevaluate the planning scheme that looks after the neighbourhood a bit more thoroughly than what we've seen here. So if we have an important precinct, a heritage precinct, I think we need to keep that front of mind that, you know, what do we want it to be like in the next 10 years or so when we have no backyards left, when the form of the area has changed, and those people who've been there for longer than others are the ones who will suffer the detriment of overdevelopment in backyards. So like I said, Chair, I'm happy to support a recommendation for refusal. And when it comes to talking about things going to appeal, we've got to be careful when we talk about how the council's going to, lose money, or the council will have to pay the costs of everything. That shouldn't be taken into account necessarily when we're defending the rights of the neighbourhood from what I think is an overdevelopment of a backyard that will have an impact on all those around it. So very comfortable with supporting a recommendation for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, I've still got a few hands up, so I'm going to Councillor Coates firstly, but if anybody doesn't want to speak, could you put your hand down, please? Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I guess I'll make a few comments of my thoughts so far, just for the benefit of the council briefly, and then a few questions through use of a director, if I could. Look, this is a hard one. I guess the default is always to trust that the report that council have put together with their formal advice to us is accurate. Obviously, we've heard tonight some conflicting reports in regards to information and what isn't applicable in this instance. And look, we've obviously heard that the main concern is around the Golf Links estate and, if you like, the visibility of existing buildings and heritage grounds. And look, I mean, we're lucky in a way that this isn't the final decision. This will go to council next week. But with that in mind, I guess, Director, we obviously heard that the residents put forth that, the images supplied by the council officer in their report were at a funny angle from Grosvenor Street. Ved said that the outbuilding wasn't visible, but it actually was building from Grosvenor Street. Obviously, if it's within the building envelope, sun diagrams don't necessarily come into it. But I guess my question to you is, do you think this is an instance where there might have been a mistake made within the report, or you're fairly confident that it was a very thoroughly done one, and and it's just a difference of opinion that we've heard tonight there?
Through you, Chair. Look, I believe the officers have got this this assessment correct. In terms of the visibility of the Skillion section to the rear, it is visible. Is it, you know, a significant visibility from View Street? No, it isn't. It's a very obscure view. The shed at the rear is not one that I think is visible from View Street, and the garage is viewable, but it's set back 20 metres, and it appears to be a much more recent addition. So the critical aspect of the heritage precinct is clearly the intact streetscape, and this proposal of the view of the officers is will not impact that critical aspect.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Director.
Councillor Dutta, did you have something more to add?
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to support this, the motion that has been put forth. There are three grounds here. And for me, even though there are conflicting views, I would say there are alternative interpretations. And we are entitled to that alternative interpretation. And for me, the clause 13.8.1 P1 is very clear on this. If there is demolition, which will result in the loss of the part of the building as well as the fabric, then I think there is three sub-clauses that it does not satisfy under that rule. And furthermore, the same thing happens with the clause 13.8.2 P1. You know, the design and setting is in result is detriment to the historic cultural significance. So therefore, I'm quite satisfied that these clauses will be able to be defended under heritage grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Barakis, did you have something more to add?
I did, Chair. Thank you. Just wanted to add, and I think something that I forgot to clarify at the beginning. When we talk about something, you know, I think there was some comments made by comments or questions by Alderman Briscoe about the you know, the matter of it not needing to worry about things like sunlight and shadowing and whatnot. I don't think the interpretation is that, you know, it doesn't need to be worried about. I think the interpretation is, as Mr. Reid said, was that if it is within the building envelope, as this application is, it's deemed to comply. So these extra diagrams aren't required to be provided. So I think once again, as I said earlier, it's a bit, I suppose it's a bit strong for members of council to be expecting applicants to provide something that isn't actually required for them to provide under the scheme. But just to touch on something that Councillor Harvey said in his remarks, he did, and I'm happy to be corrected because I hope I'm wrong, but he did seem to say that, you know, it does apply, it does meet the provisions of the planning scheme, but I don't like it, so I'm going to vote against it. You know, so I hope that he's not acknowledging that it meets the provisions of the planning scheme and then saying that he's going to vote against it, because that would be contrary to our role as a planning authority.
I'll take that as a comment unless there's anything specific you want to add, but I think your position is quite clear, Councillor Harvey. Alderman Briscoe, and then I'll sorry, Alderman Briscoe, did you want to speak?
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, my internet connection is unstable, apparently. Look, a couple of things. A question to the director when he was talking about the ridgeline being taken down to the height of the building in View Street. Is any consideration been taken by the view from Grosvenor Street, which is pretty significant?
Yes, thank you for that question, Alderman Briscoe. Yes, on page 23 of the report, the last paragraph, there's a paragraph dedicated to that exact question. Yes, it is visible, particularly in winter. In in summer when the deciduous trees have leaves, visibility of that structure, of the proposed new structure, would be significantly hindered. But the photographs that were certainly presented in the officer's report does show that it will be visible, but it will be visible in the context of buildings that are, including two-storey buildings, that are beyond the site, that go up in elevation as you go up the street. So it's seen in that context, and the officer were particularly mindful of that, and the need to ensure that the materials, and there was conditions imposed or proposed to be imposed to ensure that the materials better reflected those within the vicinity, to ensure that it, I suppose, sat better in terms of material and form within that that setting of buildings that go up the street and are elevated in height above this structure.
Thank you, Mr. Noy. I don't know how you're going to suggest materials when there's huge glass areas, which this street, this subdivision doesn't have great. The design of the houses don't have great great windows. So it'll be interesting to see if it does get built. How are you going to condition that? I suppose I do need to make a comment about the photo montages or the artist's impression, what it looks from various backyards and from Grosvenor Street. Now, one can question the accuracy of them, but if the applicant hasn't provided any alternate, then we have to accept in good faith that they are correct representations. Now, if we have an assertion that they're not correct, how do we know through you, Director, whether they are correct?
Through you, Chair, we simply don't know. This is the first time I've seen them. We haven't tested them. So we simply do not know. And they need to be considered. Not. I noticed one of them was viewed in Zoom view, and that can certainly distort what you see from the street. It's important to see it in the context of the human eye, and it's important to, for the officers to be able to scrutinise those montages to determine their accuracy.
I wonder if that is possible before the council meeting. Is that possible to scrutinise?
Well, look, we'd have to obtain them, and we'd have to seek some qualified advice.
Yes.
So I'm not sure we'd necessarily be able to guarantee that, but we could endeavour to do so.
Good. I think in future, if there is an amenity issue brought up by representors, then wouldn't the council officers have a moral duty to seek whether such photograph montages are correct, and ask the applicant to provide their own? So it seems to me that it is brought up. It seems quite compelling to me. Yet, hopefully, you'll be able to comment on it before the next council meeting. But I thought there would be a moral, almost a professional duty to check the accuracy of them.
Well, if I may comment, Chair, this is the first time we've seen them, so we're not have an ability to question them.
No, but in normal circumstances, you would question them and seek clarification, would you?
Well, we've got to be careful as to what we can require and we can't under the scheme. These montages do clearly cost an applicant and cost council to ascertain the veracity of the accuracy of them. So where we are not obliged to take those matters into consideration under the scheme, I would have thought that we've got a strong moral obligation not to impose those costs on both ratepayers and the applicant. But I appreciate the desire of neighbours to understand the impacts, amenity impacts on their property. So I appreciate that.
Yes, and as you're aware, I've got a question with a notice for another building application that did get approved and has an outrageous effect on neighbours, and the officers didn't comment about that. But anyway, that's for the questions without notice. Thank you, Mr. Noy.
Helen, you're on mute.
Thank you. Happens to everybody, doesn't it? It's not a good tech day today. Just in relation to some of the things that the applicant has put forward, whilst everybody has the right, if you like, to build within what is seen as the building envelope, I think what we see here in this application is considerable impacts on neighbours and quite a different pattern of extension, if you like, in this area. So we see some quite considerable impacts on both the Grosvenor Street direct neighbour, and to a degree, the family at 21 View Street. Now, I know that the considerations for refusal are around heritage, and I suspect that the officer had quite a difficult task in writing their report, because it's not a clear-cut case, as Ms. Gray has said. It is not clear-cut. There are various points which really fall in that sort of halfway zone, if you like, or very open to interpretation. And we have the Battery Point, the Arthur Circus example. Whether that's something that could be referred to, I don't know. However, I feel that there is considerable reason to be concerned about this, which is a real, you know, you want everybody to be able to extend, but this extension is probably 3 times the floor, the area of the original property. So it's an incredible extension when you think of it like that. So I'll put the motion as moved by Alderman Briscoe, and I'll go around the room, or around the table. Alderman Briscoe, how do you vote?
I will support the refusal motion.
Councillor Harvey?
Support.
Alderman Barakis?
Against.
Councillor Data?
For.
Councillor Coates?
Against.
And I'll vote in support. So that is carried 4 votes to 2 for refusal. So that will go to full council with that recommendation. Thank you very much. Now we now move to item 12, and I think you're declaring an interest, Alderman Barakis. Thank you.
I am.
And if we could let the representative and applicants representative in, please. You just have to tell me when they're there. Have we got, I think Mr. Core was coming in, Craig?
Chair, I think Mr. Core's left the meeting.
I see. Okay. Have we got the applicant? Is that? I think Mr. Core was coming in, Craig. I don't know where we're up to now. So have we got the applicant's representative here?
Left the meeting.
Ah, hello. I see. Okay. Have we got the applicant? Is that,
Whoever has the stream going, can you please mute it, please?
Call was coming in, right? Right, thank you. Okay, now, so Mr. Core isn't there, and I'll hand over to the applicant. So, Mr. Jones from BPSM Architects, we haven't, we might have members of the committee who may have questions, but is there anything that you wanted to say in support of your application, please?
Sorry. Our position is such that after having had multiple discussions with both UDAP and also council planning officers as well, that we're in a position where we just simply like to say that we would clearly like to endorse and support the officer's recommendation. And I suppose fundamentally I'm here more about making myself available to answer any queries that any members of the committee actually have.
Thank you. And I'll start with Alderman Briscoe. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jones. It is unfortunate that a considerable heritage building and number 40 is being demolished for this development. It seems like it's in a fairly good nick, actually, from the photographs and when you drive past. Did your client ever consider keeping that building?
Look, I will honestly say that I can't make a comment on that because he has not expressed any particular position one way or other to me on that. Look, I guess purely from the point of view that, as I understand, whilst it's obviously not technically heritage, it is obviously an older building.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? Councillor Harvey?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Mr. Jones, there were some concerns from adjoining properties in Argyle Street about overlooking. Could you just describe how you intend to address that for me, please?
Well, I suppose, again, excuse me, I mean, this is certainly an issue that was discussed in conjunction with both the initial UDAP meeting that we had, and there was discussion that was had. And so I suppose we've always endeavoured to address that issue. And certainly there are two parts to what we've done is, first of all, the building does step back on that side. And which I will probably note that it's unfortunately not as evident as it should be, particularly in, I'm not aware of whether you've seen the model that we provided to council officers.
No.
Right. But certainly as part of our application, we did actually provide a model to council, which you can reference to, that identifies each of the balconies does as the building goes up in height, does progressively step back. We've also provided planters along that, well, in fact, both street elevations, both along the Argyle Street side and also onto the Burnett Street side to break up the facade, as well as with a view that it creates vegetation over a period of time to provide screening. And also in discussion with UDAP, we have also provided a virtually opaque balustrade along the Argyle Street elevations, such that if a member of that building, or sorry, a resident of that building is sitting in their lounge room or sitting away from their deck, they don't have direct sight lines into the backyard of, I can't remember the two properties in Argyle Street. Can't remember the numbers.
272 and 274.
Yes. I mean, certainly the discussion that we had with UDAP was done on the basis that any relationship to the overlooking would be done on the basis that if you were in the backyard of either of those properties, the only way that a member or residents of the building would be able to actually see in your backyard were they to actually approach the balcony and physically lean over it and look downwards, at which point in time it was recognised that you would be aware that you would be, we'll call it under observation. So we've endeavoured to eliminate where we can the ability for someone to actually observe the backyard of those two properties unobserved.
Okay. And all right, now thanks for that. I didn't realise how stepped back it was. I couldn't quite read that in the designs on my computer.
Councillor Harvey, we've got Choi to provide us with the flyover, so we can see that in a moment. So do you want to keep asking your questions and maybe Choi can get primed?
And in relation to the house that's going to be demolished,
yes.
Is there any intent to use some of that materials, considering those materials, considering they're 140 years old? Will you try and incorporate some of the stone or the brick into the development to give it a bit of interest?
Yeah, look, certainly, given that one of the conditions that have been recommended on, I remember whether it's condition 1 or 2, was in relation to the ground floor street frontage. And so we're very open to exploring looking at that facade to incorporate elements of both 38 as well as 40 into that ground floor facade to try and tie the link between the corner and progress the streetscape on the way through, and also look at the idea of introducing brickwork along there as well. And again, that was a tenet of our discussion at the second UDAP meeting, which occurred, I think, week and a half ago.
Okay, so that would be the bricks from the demolition, not new painted bricks.
If it was deemed that the bricks could be salvaged and it was an appropriate solution, yes, we would certainly entertain it.
Okay, all right. And I see that it's a tilt-up concrete slab building. Is that for the entire structure? Will it be concrete and steel throughout the whole building, or are you considering some other more environmentally different aspects of the building? Could you describe what environmental aspects you'll be trying to incorporate?
Look, I suppose certainly in terms of, look, quite honestly, there is detail that's still, given that the level of which the development is at the moment in terms of obviously a planning application, there is certainly detail still to be resolved in terms of its construction methodology. But yes, you are right. Principally, there is a basis of a concrete structure at its core, but where we have looked at, we're looking at certainly the original profile of the roof, the sawtooth roof, aside from dragging in the heritage aspects of the old Donald Gorringe building, which of course is no longer there, and tying with the industrial nature of earlier parts of North Hobart, is such that if it's deemed suitable at a point in time, that the body corporate can look at the idea of both solar hot water and also solar power for all the solar hot water for the individual tenancies, individual building, residential apartments. Can also look at the idea of utilising solar panels for the common area lighting and heating. We've also examined the idea of actually providing electric charging stations within the car parking for residential tenants that may have or may be looking at providing a residential, or obtaining an electric vehicle. Certainly, we're looking to maximise the amount of vegetation on both the predominant visible facades to enhance, I suppose, soften it both visually, architecturally, but also provide an environmental component to it as well. We have internally light wells to try and provide as much natural ventilation throughout the building. And also from there, all of those light wells will in fact be provided with vegetation at the bottom of the light wells to utilise and capture the natural rainfall that will come in through the open-ended areas. We're proposing that we've got several areas, or certainly one area on that Argyle Street frontage, where we're looking at even providing a small garden area that can be accessible for the planting of small fruit trees or vegetables, as the case might be, for sharing amongst the residences.
All right. So there's a number of elements there that would respond to the climate crisis. Would you agree that architects and developers need to be thinking along these lines?
Certainly, yes. My comment would be that as an architect, whilst I might want to push ideas, I'm up to a certain point pushed by the direction of your client. So, you know, this is a personal opinion in saying this, that I fully support trying to make developments and buildings as environmentally friendly as we possibly can. But we're always, as a professional consultant, we're always a little bit governed by where our clients, whether they be private developers, government developers, or sorry, government clients may be, are looking to push the direction of a project, as well as what's governed by the budget.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, will this building have a rating? What do you think the rating might land at?
Look, in all honesty, it's not one I'm prepared to guess at.
Yep.
Just simply because, again, we haven't at this point in time done enough of a detailed study at that level of detailed design to be able to determine what a NABERS or Green Star rating it may achieve.
Okay. All right then. Thank you.
Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions stemming from the landscaping and your comment on planters. What are the range of plant heights and forms that's being considered? And secondly, the second question is, how will the planter boxes be successful, do you think?
I guess we're endeavouring to provide as much depth, length and width as we possibly can to each of those individual planter boxes. But fundamentally, as part of the process, we'll be looking to engage an appropriately qualified landscape architect who can actually then provide advice in relation to an appropriate, correct selection of plantings based upon the circumstances, the location, and as well the likely, quite honestly, what is probably going to be a mix of potentially permanent owner-occupied and maybe tenanted rental property, and the ability for those boxes and plants to be maintained by the corporate scenario. Again, look, I'm in a position where I'm an architect. I'm not a landscape architect, so I'm not actually qualified to make commentary around specific plant species. That's why I go and engage a consultant for that particular process.
Thank you.
Did you have another question, Councillor Data? Is that it?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions. So just going back to the amenity of 272 and 274 Argyle Street, you say that the building is set back, but I don't see that, so I might see that in the flyover, but it's, do you mean set back because it's got balconies? And in that situation, surely when somebody's on a balcony and they can see right into the backyard, the amenity will be reduced. So that's obviously standing on a balcony.
Now, I suppose, first of all, the balconies themselves are stepped back so that progressively as the building goes up in height, the start of the balcony is actually further away from the boundary line. Look, the reality is, is that fundamentally, whenever you have a multi-storey building, that there is always going to be, unfortunately, an element of overlooking, unless, of course, you simply don't have any outlook from that particular elevation or that facade. All that we can do is endeavour to try and minimise it as much as we possibly can.
Yep, and I suppose on the other side, we're up hard against a warehouse, and yes. I note that you've talked about the void, but I'm particularly concerned about the bedrooms, the second bedrooms in the apartments 1.9, 2.9, 3.9. So they have they look out into the void, if you like, as far as, and that's, I hope that I'm reading this properly. So they don't have an external view, or, you know, like they don't have an external window. There's a void which is about 1.5 metres in depth. Is that right?
Sorry, just bear with me. Look, it's probably, now, in answer to your question, we engaged a building physicist because looking forward, as one of the requirements, taking the positive approach, one of the requirements that we need to comply with is light and amenity into these second rooms from a building code perspective under section F. So we have actually engaged, and that was actually formed part of our submission, the documentation attached to that, was we engaged a building physicist who undertake utilising modelling and assessment of all of our internal light wells to determine that they actually would provide the required daylighting factor and lighting factor into each room such that we could actually achieve ventilation and also daylighting under section F of the building code.
Okay, and lastly, just in relation to bicycles and access through the car park, obviously the concerns were raised in relation to the safety. Is there any way that you feel that a condition could work to kind of improve the safety there?
Sorry, in relation to bicycles actually travelling down Burnett Street or into the building itself?
Travelling within the building, though. So I think what usually happens is that bicycle facilities or cages are usually at the front of car park areas.
Look, certainly it's a it's a condition that we'd be happy to consider. I mean, it's even from the point of view that particularly if you're a cyclist that lives in the building, naturally the assumption is that there's two ways into that car park. There's obviously the driveway, but there's also, once you enter the building into the lift lobby, there's also another door that leads the lift lobby into the car park, which is a door that's accessible for anybody that actually has access into the car parking area of the building. So certainly there's the ability, as it stands, to currently enter the car park safely to park your bicycle, and we'd certainly be open to any specific conditions that relating to parking.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I'll speak to the director about that. Okay. So it's a $14 million development. And what sort of discussions have you had with neighbours?
Certainly in terms of the one neighbour being 38 Burnett Street is actually a building surveyor, and he, quite honestly, is part of the consultancy team. So he's been fully engaged in that process. The Argyle Street residents have been in discussion with representatives of the client. So they've been having ongoing discussions around what was aware, and they've been discussing what may occur, what may not occur.
Okay. All right, thank you. I just take note of, I spoke to one of the representatives today who owns one of the properties on Argyle Street, and was felt that there wasn't that sort of discussion with them. So, and is there any social housing provided within this application? Not that it has to be, but it's just a question that I'd like to hear an answer for.
Look, I guess that's not a comment I can make because from a development perspective, it's not something I could commit a client to. That's entirely I guess their position as to whether and how they and what market they're looking to aim at.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Mr. Jones, and we'll have a look at the flyover from Choi. So Choi, could you launch that, please? And perhaps if there are any other questions, we might ask them of you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So here's the model if everyone can see it. So what I would do is I will go up Burnett Street, and I'll come back later to show you guys the setback that was queried before. So now we're in Elizabeth Street corner. Okay, and so the setback. So you will see that the gap between that floor and that floor is different.
And Choi, can we have a look at the front and the? I think it's there's a little bit of gap on the right hand side of the front of the building right at the front anyway.
So adjacent to the building next door, or because what I've got is
yeah.
Okay, so I'll go back. Chair, is that what you'd like to see?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Are there any other views that anybody wants to see? If not, thanks, Choi.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Facing the camera. A question to the, through you, Chair, to the Director. The 1880s cottage that will be demolished, what would be the future of the heritage status of that, say, by end of next year, if this development wasn't going ahead?
Yes, through you, Chair, the adjacent, 40 Burnett Street is proposed to be listed under the local provision schedule as part of the new statewide scheme.
Yes, thank you, Director. Look, it is unfortunate, and even Mr. Booth in his report has indicated it's unfortunate because there is a small and coherent residential enclave of later Victorian properties. Now, I don't feel this in itself is enough for me to say no to this development, but I would like to add an extra, I'm happy to move the recommendation with just an extra condition, the standard condition where we have a good photographic record of the building that's being demolished. So in future, historians, when they're doing the social history of this area, have got good photo records of this 1880s, which was a significant time in Hobart's history. There was a fair bit of money floating around. And so that you had these fairly grand houses for pretty ordinary people. Sorry, they weren't the rich capitalists or the landowners, but they were quite substantial houses. So can you see a problem with adding a condition like that, Director?
No, I think we could, assuming that the applicant was happy to accept that, I think that that's a reasonable request.
Okay, so I'll move the recommendation for approval with that extra condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be supporting this tonight as well. I think 31 units, 5 stories. I would have liked to have seen a bit more contribution, taking it off the boundaries, which would have conformed with our new regulations that are coming, I think, this week sometime. So building right on the boundary, I think that is unfortunate, but I will support it tonight, and hopefully we won't see building right on the boundary again into the future. Would that be true, Mr. Noy?
Look, there is still scope to build on the boundary, but clearly the acceptable solutions under the new provisions would require greater setback to ensure protection of the residential amenity of the new dwelling. So I think that it will be a harder task to be able to build right up to the boundary in most instances.
Very timely.
Councillor Coates.
Look, yeah, very quickly, I reiterate the comments I've heard. I think it's a good development. I always fear that in some ways we encourage a lot of developers to build, dog boxes and sky really small pokey apartments. It's great to see some nice 2-3 bedroom, spacious, looks like well appointed buildings. I think it's great. I heard the point raised by the Deputy Mayor. I think it's awesome that we have bicycle access, through the front door into your storage area in the garage. You don't actually have to go through the car entrance, which is lovely to see. And look, they're, I guess, as best possible, keeping in mind I've got to build apartments in an inner city block, but they've included foliage and trees. So look, I think it's a good development, and I think it's the sort of thing the city's screaming out for. So yeah, I'll be in favour.
Thank you. Yes, I'll add to that. I believe this is a really quality development, and it's good to see. I mean, whilst it just goes slightly over the height limitations, and there will be impact on those 2 heritage houses at Argyle Street and the loss of another heritage house, as Alderman Briscoe has said. I believe that this is the architects have done well to make the most of this development, this site or these sites together. Director, is there anything that we can do to mitigate my concerns in relation to bike access and safety?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I think we could certainly put an additional advice clause in. It's not a requirement under the current provisions that you're required to provide bicycle parking, but clearly the applicant is keen to provide it. So I'm sure that by providing an additional advice clause around, security for bikes. I think access is pretty good in terms of access to some of the storage area through the foyer area. I think that's reasonable, but clearly the storage area could be a little bit more secure. An advice clause to that effect would be appropriate.
Alderman Briscoe, would you be okay to add that in as advice to your motion?
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Thank you. And yes, and again, I think this is a quality development. In some ways, it's a pity that there is 2.5 floors of parking because this is right on the transport route. It's within easy walking distance to the city and to North Hobart, and I'll be shot down for saying such things, but it is good access, no doubt, for many people, and with relatively good facilities for recreation close by as well, with an easy walk to the domain and other parts for those who can, and with bike access. So I think encouragement of reduction in the use of cars is something that obviously would be good for North Hobart. So if there's no further comments, is there any dissent to the motion? Could you speak up now if there's any dissent to the motion with that slight amendment? So if there's no dissent, I'll declare that carried unanimously. Thanks, Mr. Jones. Thanks,
Right.
Choi.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and that decision is final given that we provided delegation to the committee. Now we go back to I better invite Alderman Barakis back in, and we go now to 7.1.1, which is 20 McVilly Drive. Can I have a motion for that, please? That's Councillor Dutta. Thank you, Councillor Dutta. Is there any discussion in relation to this? If there's no discussion, then is there any dissent to the motion being carried as it is? There's no dissent. I declare that carried. Item 7.1.2, which is 3 Argyle Street, and these are all considerations under the City of under the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme for these two. So 3 Argyle Street, it's the signage in relation to the monuments for Antarctic explorers. Can I have somebody move that? Councillor Harvey. Thank you. Any discussion in relation to this? Just have a question. They seem to be very light on detail, Director, and also I'm concerned that this is very close to something less aesthetically pleasing than you might consider, which is the bins. Why is it that we don't have all the information, and why is it that they were so adamant to have it on this side of that concrete plinth?
Look, I think this is a sort of a second iteration of the proposal, the first one being a much more significant structure, which raised concerns at an officer level. So it was felt, the applicant clearly felt that this was an alternative that fitted their needs. In terms of the detail, it is a modest size structure, so I think the applicant was had not fully resolved those matters, but I don't think it necessarily is critical. Well, it certainly wasn't perceived as being a critical aspect when those details could be conditioned and signed off at officer level, because it is a concrete wall. So we in terms of the impact on that concrete wall, the scale that it is, we didn't feel that detail was critical at this point.
Okay, as long as we don't have to move the bins in 6 months' time, maybe at their cost. Okay, so if there's, it's been moved by Councillor Harvey. Is there any dissent to the motion? No dissent. I declare that carried unanimously, and that will go to full council next week. We now move back to the City of Hobart planning scheme, interim planning scheme, to 7.2.2, which is 39 Princess Street, Sandy Bay. So this is for some changes. Alderman Barakis, you're happy to move that? Thank you. Any discussion? No discussion by the looks of it. Thank you. Is there any dissent to the motion? No dissent. I declare that carried. Item 7.2.3, which is 1 and 2, 266 Churchill Avenue for 3 multiple dwellings, 2 existing and 1 extra. Can I have somebody move that, please? Councillor Dutta, I think you got there first. Thank you. Any discussion? No discussion. This is all becoming too easy then. Okay. Any dissent to the motion? There's no dissent. I declare that carried unanimously. I think we're up to reports now. Are we not, Dave? Yep. Okay. Good. Thanks.
Yes, correct, Chair. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Just checking if you're awake. So first report is 8.1, the Public Art Framework, Public Art Private Development Guide. And Councillor Harvey, you've moved this. Thank you. Do you want to speak to it?
Just briefly, it looks like we can't compel anyone to do anything. So this is an optional contribution, but it's good to have a guide so that if there are developers who are interested in contributing to the art, the street art of Hobart, then so there's something to guide them along. I hope that developers do contribute to this because it does help create a bit of atmosphere in Hobart, and I hope they do follow the guidelines if they are intending to incorporate public art, because then we'll end up with better results than if someone just decides that they want to do something that has no significance or is not coordinated with our arts department. So supportive of these guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's a good idea. I think we tend to think that private developers are not interested in art, and I'm sure I know quite a few of them that are. However, the biggest developer, one of the biggest developers in Hobart in the next few years is going to be the university. So I think we should be sending, if this gets through council, a copy especially for the Vice-Chancellor and saying, encouraging him, as he said to us the other day, that he's going to fund some street works in Melville Street when that he should incorporate some art. Now, I think that would be a good synergy, the City of Hobart and the university and this private art policy. So I support it. It's not going to be, for other developers, smaller developers, it's going to be hard. But for the major developers like the university, I think we should be strongly encouraging them, especially in terms that they have an art school. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Just, Director, can you just explain, I know that there's a limit of value of the development application, but for those people who are interested in perhaps pursuing this on smaller developments, they might have a big wall, but may have a smaller development. Is the council interested in helping them to pursue this?
Yeah, yes, Chair. Clearly, we would encourage all developers that had a mind to wanting to contribute public art to the community to read the guidelines, because I think it's applicable to all developments.
Because we've got that example at, I think it's 4 Regent Street, where there's some sort of mosaic on the front of the building, obviously a private building, and I think like that adds to the streetscape, and if we can encourage that, then well and good. So maybe it will go a little further than just to major developers that when it comes to us. Alderman Barakis, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to confirm, what's being proposed now in the recommendations has no powers of compulsion over developers at all, does it? It's set as a guideline.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. I mean, within the planning scheme, within the central commercial zones, there is provision to provide civic amenities when considering discretion. So, and clearly public art is potentially one of those civic amenities. So it provides, and we do get approaches by developers for some guidelines. So this will definitely provide that guideline to those developers that are seeking to provide those civic amenities.
Thank you for that, Director. And look, I think everybody in the virtual room is supportive of encouraging more art and encouraging developers that are able to add public art to their projects. I think that's definitely a good thing. I do think when this did come to council in 2019, I think it was in September 2019, I think I was told off by one of the elected members for referring to this as a tax and suggesting that this would be unenforceable and not a non-compliant proposal, which is interesting that that's exactly the feedback that we got once legal advice was sought. And I think the part 2 of the report does say that it was not possible to in fact put this mandatory scheme in, as it would be seen to constitute a tax. So I do feel rather vindicated by that, and I think it was a bit of an ill-advised proposal in the first place to go down that road. But I think what we have at the moment as a general sort of framework and a guideline for developers that choose to contribute to public art that are able to incorporate that into their developments, I think is a positive thing. So I'd support this.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I'm glad Alderman Barakas supports it now, because I don't think you supported it when it came to the council. So it's good to see you now support something, because previously we might not have had any guidelines had we all voted against it. But what I'd like to focus on, through you, Chair, could we have an update on contributions from developers looking forward, that maybe twice a year, if we can keep a list of what developers have contributed or their interest? It might need to be in the closed if necessary, but I'd like to know whether the guidelines are being used and whether developers are contributing to the public art contribution. How do we report this?
Yeah, look, through you, Chair. Look, happy to, maybe on an annual basis, given scale of developments that may have diminished in future years, but happy to do it on an annual basis as to report on what contributions have been made.
Mm-hmm. Does that need the amendment as it go into the recommendation?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to put that in. Is everybody happy with that?
So I think I moved it, didn't I?
Yeah. If you're happy to accept that in, to report back in every 12 months as to the contribution.
Yep. Okay. Can we, please?
All right. So I'll. Is there any dissent to the motion? Can you raise your hand?
Not dissent, but I had another comment to add.
Well, yep. If you just before we finish off, Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it was necessary to respond to one of the comments that Councillor Harvey made. I did say,
but anyway,
sorry, I did say that I was supportive of encouraging more developers. I did say that at the time. I was supportive of more public art, but I did say that I didn't support it because it was a tax, and that was supported by the legal advice.
All right. Is there any dissent to the motion? Alderman Barakas, are you dissenting now? Or you've got your hand up? No, you're not.
Apologies, no, I'm not dissenting.
All right. Okay, so it's carried unanimously. Thank you. 8.2 is the COVID-19 format. Now, I did speak to Mr. Jackson this afternoon, and he said that it may be, so that the council chamber may be the place where we would meet if we're going back, and I think that's generally what the committee has considered offline at least. The council chamber has a capacity of 23 people, and given the Lady Osborne room has only 14 individuals, even with the ante room, it would be that we are likely to go back to the council chamber. But I just probably need a motion, a more broad motion to suggest that we return to meeting physically at the town hall should the committee want to do that. So is anybody happy to move that? Alderman Briscoe, you're happy with that?
Yes, and I suppose I am. So I'll move that we move for our next meeting physically back into council. One good thing about our Zoom meetings is that we've had graphics and our amendments and our suggested new motions that are available straight away on our laptop via sharing via Zoom. So I wonder if the council officers presumably will still be able to provide that service, because unless we have a huge great screen in the council chambers where we could do the same thing. But I think technically it's possible, because it's been proved that we can share to our laptops amendments or new motions. So I wonder, whilst it can't be part of the motion, because the motion just reads that we return to physical meetings from the next city planning meeting, that the sharing of materials via our laptops has been one positive about Zoom meetings.
Craig, do you want to answer that, or Dave?
Chair, we will look in. I've made a note of it, so I will give it to Paul tomorrow for consideration when we go back.
Thank you. And my understanding is that the audio visual for those people who do want to attend in person can be, it will be set up in the Lady Osborne room anyway. Okay, so is everybody happy with us to go back? Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey and Alderman Baraka. Oh, everybody wants to speak. Councillor Harvey, then Alderman Barakas, then Councillor Coates, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We've seen an outbreak again in Adelaide or South Australia today. So I'm just wondering what the trigger is, or the numbers for Hobart if we get a second wave, and do we still have the mechanism to go back to Zoom meetings if required? Like, is there a time limit on the legislation that, you know, allowed us to be able to meet at home or meet, you know, via Zoom? Through you, Chair, to the Director.
Yeah, look, there is a time limit, and at this point in time, it has not expired. So, and to your first question, I mean, we'd need to be guided by, you know, the state government health officials as to the appropriateness of meeting in person under those circumstances. So all those sort of guidelines would be a matter for state government health officials.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Chair, I'm supportive of meeting in person, but I do anticipate we may have to go back to Zoom at some point, and I'd like to think we've already got it in the bag with, you know, regard to how that happens again, and whether legislation will need to be extended into the future for a while to accommodate it, rather than I'm assuming that it'd be easy enough to extend our rights to Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Look, oh, sorry. Mr. Noy?
No, look, yeah, like it would be a matter for the state government to extend it, but clearly they were mindful of putting it in place in the first instance. So I wouldn't imagine that they would see any issue with reimposing such a requirement or ability to meet virtually.
Mm. Okay, and generally speaking, it's worked well with Zoom, but we've had our hiccups today, so it's probably telling us that we need to get back in the room together. Alderman Barakas.
Thank you, Chair, and look, I definitely do support us going back to in-person meetings. I think Zoom's been obviously a saviour for us to be able to continue to operate during this period, but I think there is a certain level of, I think, credibility is not amongst anything, and also that extra human factor in us being able to debate things eye to eye, and also being able to discuss matters with representatives face to face and eye to eye. Just to Councillor Harvey's point, I suppose, you know, as they said, there was a time limit, but I think, and I imagine, given the Premier's attitude towards this, that he'd be more than willing to extend that if that was necessary. So I hope that's not a issue. Suppose I do have one question. Two questions actually. Are we endorsing a specific sort of layout? Or are we just endorsing it and to be sort of as per the officer's guidelines?
It's as per the officer's guidelines, according to that discussion I had with Mr. Jackson, because they've still got some tweaking to do.
And I suppose the follow-up question, and that what you just said might indicate there might not be a clear answer tonight. If we're having committee meetings in the council chamber, how would that impact on, or how would there? I'm assuming there'd be a way for representatives to be able to come to the table and discuss things with us as well.
Yeah. So that would be as we would with public question time when it comes to council meetings. So I mean, there's capacity for some people to sit in the council chamber and still be COVID safe, but you know, if there's an overflow, then it will be in the other room, in the Lady Osborne room, where the audio visual will be set up to watch proceedings anyway.
Thank you for that, Chair. Look, yeah, I think this is great, and I would hope that, you know, if anything was to happen, we'd go back to Zoom meetings sooner rather than later. But I think so long as we can, it is better that we are able to discuss things and meet in person. I think there is that extra bit of a human touch that sometimes is taken away when we're looking at the Brady Bunch on the screens here. And look, just to, even though it's not necessarily a matter for this particular item, as Councillor, or as Alderman Briscoe suggested, in the future, I think it might be beneficial for us to be able to have these sort of live goings on of motions as we're discussing them. And I would note it might be, you know, a cost to council at a time when it's not really appropriate for us to be adding to our costs. But, you know, I think quite a few of the other councils, including Clarence, have a projector in the room that does have which items being debated, and when there's amendments made, it's all done on their live, so everybody's, you know, quite literally on the same page. So just that, I'll just note that, but that might be a discussion for a later date.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. The question is, if we decide tonight to go and meet physically, would there be that option as well, if one is not able to come, to be on the Zoom, as was mentioned, that we have that option for council meetings?
A lot of the details to be worked out, I think, Councillor Dutta, but I'll refer that to Dave. Do you have any ideas about that, David?
I think, as you said, Chair, there's quite a bit of detail to work through, and I've noted that, and I will give that to Paul.
Answered like a true politician. Well done, Dave. Okay, Councillor Dutta, any other questions?
Thank you, no more, thanks.
Okay, so, Alderman Briscoe, you've got something else to say?
Yeah, just I've been trying for 10 years to get a big screen in our council meeting. It takes a crisis like this to work out it is technically possible. And I remember when we were issued laptops maybe 20 odd years ago, maybe 25 years ago. Oh yes, we'll be able to share things on the screen, and we'll be able to share amendments and that. So a crisis has come, and therefore good things have come out of it. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Is there any dissent to this motion? If there's no dissent, I'll declare that carried unanimously. Now, item 8.3, which is delegated decisions report. Can I have somebody move that, please? Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Is there any dissent if I put that? No dissent. Thank you. Declare that carried. Item 8.4 is City Planning Advertising Report. Ms. Abey, is there anything that we... Councillor Harvey, you've moved that. Thank you. Ms. Abey, is there anything of interest, or is there anything that elected members want to raise?
The main item I wanted to bring to the attention of the elected members is 32 Romilly Street, which is a development involving, there's one existing dwelling on that property with 9 new dwellings at an estimated value of $3.6 million for those works. There are a number of other items listed as coming to the council, but therefore the due to having works in the road reserve and those sorts of issues.
And that's on Romilly Street's on council land, or is it a private?
I'm not sure whether there's an element on the oh yes, sorry, it is. It is noted as being partly on council land, so I expect that's part of the road works there.
Thank you. Any other ones anybody wants to raise? No. Okay. It's been moved by. Sorry, I didn't write it down. Who moved that? Councillor Harvey. Yep. All right. Any dissent to that? There being no dissent, I declare that carried unanimously. And the 8.5 is the monthly building statistics. Can I have somebody move that, please? Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a comment, the Director did provide to me, which I think I asked him for, these statistics is a form of a line graph, and the line graph does demonstrate seasonal fluctuations over the years. So I think he did offer that it could be provided each month like this as an additional graph. So just confirm that's the case, Director.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, happy to provide those in line graph form if it provides greater clarity for elected members.
Yeah, and thanks. And so I'll make that part of my motion, and line graphs are provided as well. Thank you.
Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Director and staff for the information. I think I did raise this last time, but I might be wrong. But can we get these statistics provided in a non-accumulative comparison as well? And if Alderman Briscoe would like to include that, it'd be much appreciated.
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, happy to include that information on a month-by-month amount as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's just, I think the accumulative statistics are good to looking at things as far as the trends and stuff like that. But I think it also does give a good side-by-side comparison on how things are going year by year, and getting rid of the accumulative sort of function of those graphs. I think lets us break down each month compared to that same month in previous years. So I think it just helps to analyse how we're going with things. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
No, sorry, I just didn't take my hand down.
All righty, if there's no more amendments, I'll see if there's any dissent to that as it is. No, so that's declared carried unanimously. So item 9 is responses to questions without notice. Alderman Briscoe, thank you. Any discussion or comment? Well, there's no discussion. I'll just have that received and noted. Any dissent? No dissent. It's carried. Item 10 is questions without notice. Do we have any questions without notice? Councillor Harvey and Alderman Briscoe and Alderman Barakis.
Thanks, Chair. My question is to the Director, what environmental standards apply to multi-residential developments?
I'll take that one on that question on notice. Are you talking, but did you want clarification in relation to planning and or building, or both?
Well, when it comes to Green Star rating and neighbours rating, I'm wondering what multi-residential developments need to comply with. Is there a national standard or a state standard for environmental performance?
Through you, Chair, I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you.
Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I have provided this in writing to Mr. Noy, and I'm asking a question regarding the overlooking and the sheer bulk of the buildings that are being constructed at 55 Mount Stewart Road and the effect on 53. Remember that the 4 contentious units were being built on the site of the illegal demolition, and I got invited to the site last week, and the question is, will officers visit the neighbour's site at 53 and compare the overlooking into the neighbour's house and garden that is happening when the officer's report for the approval said that they have little or no effect? And what steps could be taken to avoid such a situation in the future? The neighbours realise there's nothing they can do about it now, but what things could we do to make sure such developments do not have the impact multi-unit developments in a residential area does not have the impact in future? Thank you.
Yes, happy to take that one on notice, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. The first one is in relation to the responses to your own question. With those numbers that you've got on the table there, Director, given that it seems to be a pretty not that huge of a list, is it possible to get a list of which developments those were included in those statistics?
Sorry, can you clarify what
the table that you've got there, where it's got 25 approved and 7 started work, which is 28%. Is it possible to get a list of which ones those were?
Sorry, that's in relation to 9.3 multi-storey apartments, commercial properties. Is that, sorry, which?
The response, it was the response to the Deputy Lord Mayor's question about multi-storey apartments.
Right. Yes, we can provide you with a list.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I imagine you'd be taking that one on notice.
Yes.
And the second question was, can you provide us with some sort of advice just to confirm the roles and responsibilities of councillors and aldermen when acting as a planning authority?
Yes, happy to be able to provide that advice, but I will provide it in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't think there are any more. Thank you. All right. So do we have to receive and note those, Dave, or just go on?
No, we're right to proceed, Chair.
Okay, so what I'll do now is adjourn this meeting and go into the closed meeting. So because we want a decision back in this meeting, don't we, after we've been to consider item 13?
No, you don't have to, Chair, because you've transferred it into the closed, so the decision can be made in closed. Then it'll go to open council.
Is that all right with you, Alderman Briscoe?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's the normal thing rather than coming back into. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. So can I have a motion to move into closed? Alderman Briscoe, are you happy to move that?
Yeah,
thank you. Okay, thank you, and thank you for members of the public. It's